After his wife left, a homeless man and his dog built a peaceful life in the mountains. Snow fell thick and silent across the small Montana town, blanketing the street where Raymond Hale stood alone. The foreclosed notice flapped against his front door, a final punctuation mark to 25 years of shared life. He didn't flinch as the cold bit into his hands. Next to him, Juno, a golden rescue dog with intelligent storm-colored eyes, let out a long, mournful bark. It wasn't angry. It sounded almost human, like grief given voice. "Quiet, Juno," Raymond muttered. His voice cracked from exhaustion and defeat. But Juno didn't stop. She kept her gaze fixed on the house's open doorway, where Sarah had walked out hours earlier, suitcase in hand, her shadow swallowed by falling snow. Raymond had watched her go without a word. There was nothing left to say. Inside, the house was stripped of warmth. Furniture gone, walls bare, echoes of laughter trapped between memories. He picked up his toolbox, the last thing he owned outright, and ran his hand over the scarred lid. Years of building homes for others, and he couldn't save his own. The door creaked behind him. A young man from the bank stood awkwardly on the porch, his breath forming nervous clouds in the air. He held a clipboard. "Mr. Hale, I'm supposed to have you cleared out by noon." Raymond looked at him, expression unreadable. "You always do this on Christmas week?" The kid shifted, guilt in his eyes. "I just follow the orders, sir." Juno suddenly lunged forward, barking so sharply the sound cracked through the cold. Her fur bristled, tail low, ears flattened. The young man stepped back, startled. "She's fine," Raymond said, pulling her collar. "She just doesn't like people bringing bad news." But Juno's growl deepened, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. She wasn't reacting to the banker. Her nose was tilted slightly toward the back of the house, ears twitching as if listening to something unseen. Then came the sound, a faint creak, almost imperceptible, the back door shifting on its hinge. Raymond frowned. "Did you leave that open?" The banker shook his head, uneasy. Raymond walked down the hall, Juno pacing beside him, alert and tense. When he reached the kitchen, he froze. A shadow flickered past the back window, fast as breath. "Hey," he called out, stepping outside into the cold. Nothing but snow and silence. Yet Juno's hackles were still raised, eyes fixed on the woods beyond the property line. For a brief second, Raymond thought he saw movement between the trees, a figure maybe, or a trick of wind and light. But when he blinked, it was gone. He turned to Juno. "Probably just a stray." She didn't believe him. She kept watching, muscles rigid, a low whine forming in her throat. By the time Raymond turned back inside, the young banker was gone. Only the foreclosure notice remained, nailed to the door. He stood there for a long moment, breathing shallowly, then knelt beside Juno. "It's over, girl. Just you and me now." Her tail brushed the snow, slow and uncertain. That night, Raymond slept in his truck parked along the edge of town. He hadn't wanted to face anyone at the diner or the bar, the places where people still remembered him as the man who built half the county's porches. The heater coughed weakly, barely fighting the cold. Juno rested her head on his knee, amber eyes reflecting the dashboard light. Outside, snow whispered against the windshield. "You ever think about how fast things vanish?" He murmured. "One day you've got a wife, a home, a business. Next day it's just gone." Juno licked his hand once and looked toward the horizon. At dawn, Raymond woke to find frost clinging to the inside of the glass and Juno staring through it, ears pricked. A set of footprints crossed the snow outside, fresh, human, and unfamiliar. They circled the truck once, then disappeared towards the woods. Raymond stepped out, boots crunching. No houses nearby, no tire tracks. Whoever had walked there had done it silently, maybe during the night. He looked down at Juno. "You saw them, didn't you?" Her tail was still, her breath forming mist. A thin unease crawled through him, something he couldn't quite name. The mountain range stretched westward in the distance, jagged and white, calling to some old part of himself that remembered being strong, capable, alive. His father used to say the mountains could strip a man down to truth. Raymond opened the truck door and climbed in. "Come on, girl. Let's go find somewhere no one can take away from us." As the pickup rattled onto the frozen road, Juno looked out the window. Behind them, the house grew smaller, then vanished beneath the curtain of falling snow. But if Raymond had looked in the mirror just once before turning onto the highway, he might have seen the figure standing by the tree line, a man in a dark coat, half hidden by white drifts, watching his truck fade into the distance. Juno saw him, and she barked once, low and sharp, a warning swallowed by the storm. It was the first bark of a story that would test every instinct, every scar, and every ounce of loyalty they had left. The old pickup shuddered as Raymond shifted gears, tires crunching over patches of frozen gravel. The road out of town curved past the grain silos and into open country, where the wind carried the taste of ice and pine. In the passenger seat, Juno sat upright, unusually alert, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror as though she expected someone, or something, to follow. Raymond didn't speak. His jaw was clenched, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting beside the cup holder where his wedding ring used to sit. That morning, he'd tossed the ring into a gas station trash can without ceremony. No speech, no closure. Just a metal circle that no longer meant anything except wait. Juno hadn't taken it well. The moment he'd thrown the ring away, she'd started barking. Not the panicked kind, not the excited kind. Something deeper. Urgent. A sound that made the gas station clerk glance up from her lottery scratcher, startled. Raymond had ignored it. Just a dog reacting to a sound. That's what he told himself. But as he pulled onto the highway, she kept turning in her seat to look out the back window, whining low in her throat. Her body was tense, coiled like she was waiting for something to go wrong. "That's behind us now," Raymond muttered, not sure if he was talking to her or himself. It was nearly 6 hours to the Bridger Range. He knew the route by heart, though it had been over 30 years since he'd last driven it. He'd camped there as a boy with his father, a gruff, stoic man who'd taught him to whittle, to fish, and to keep his mouth shut when nothing useful needed saying. The mountains were the only place that had ever felt clean, untouched, honest. He didn't have a destination, just an old memory and a sketch from an old map. That was enough. They stopped once, at a supply store off the interstate. He bought canned food, propane, dog kibble, nails, and duct tape. More than he could afford, less than he needed. The clerk didn't ask questions, and Raymond didn't offer conversation. Back on the road, the terrain grew rougher, elevation rising with each winding mile. By late afternoon, the snow had started again, just enough to blur the edges of the road and the line between land and sky. Juno sat with her head pressed to the cold glass, tracking every movement outside, every tree, every flicker of shadow. "You're jumpy today," Raymond said quietly. She looked at him, ears perked, and let out a soft sound, more breath than bark. He'd owned dogs his whole life, but Juno was different, smarter, more intuitive, almost too much so. When the sun dipped below the ridgeline, he turned onto a logging road, barely visible under snow and time. The truck groaned as it climbed. Branches scraped the sides like fingernails on metal. More than once, Raymond had to stop and clear the path himself, swearing under his breath forming clouds in the air. After another mile, the road ended. They were alone, The air was thinner here, quieter. Raymond stepped out, boots sinking into the snowpack, and looked around the clearing. Trees framed the space like cathedral walls. At the far edge, half covered in drifts, were the remnants of a structure, just stones and broken timber. But it was enough. He opened the truck door. "Come on, girl." Juno jumped out without hesitation. Her body went still, then forward, nose to the ground. She circled wide, sniffing every inch of the site before letting out a sharp bark. Raymond followed her gaze. Nothing but trees. Still, the hair on his arms stood up. It took him hours to clear the snow away from the foundation. The timbers were rotted, but the stone was solid. Someone had known what they were doing, laying it level, angled toward the southern sun. He pitched a tarp between the truck and a tree and made camp for the night. The fire was small but steady. He opened a can of stew and shared it with Juno, who ate silently, eyes flicking into the darkness between trees. She stayed close, not from fear, but from a sense of duty. "Why do you bark back there?" he asked, breaking a silence made heavy by memory. "It wasn't the ring, was it?" She licked her paw, then looked at him the way only she could. Not like a pet, like a partner. Raymond shook his head and rubbed his hands together. His fingers were cracked and swollen from cold and years of carpentry. All that work, all those roofs he'd framed, floors he'd poured, siding he'd leveled, and now here he was, starting from scratch. "You know this is crazy, right?" he said. "A man my age trying to live like a damn pioneer." Juno stretched out beside the fire, her tail sweeping the pine needles behind her. She didn't move again until late that night, when a sound from the woods made her sit up straight, ears aimed into the dark. Raymond felt it too. A snap. Then silence. He reached for the hatchet lying beside his boot. Didn't say anything, just waited. But nothing came. Eventually Juno laid back down, though her head stayed up for another hour, watching, listening. Raymond didn't sleep much, not because of fear, but because for the first time in weeks he felt something other than numbness. Cold, hunger, focus, purpose. The next morning he found tracks in the snow. Human, but not his, leading up to the edge of the clearing and back again. He crouched, traced a boot heel with his finger. He looked at Juno. "You knew, didn't you?" She walked past him, nose in the snow, tail stiff. Alert. He didn't follow the tracks. Not yet. He had shelter to build. And maybe, just maybe, something to protect. The sun barely broke through the clouds that morning, casting a cold, silvery light across the clearing as Raymond walked the perimeter of what remained of the old mining cabin. Stones mostly. Blackened timbers. Nails rusted so deep into the wood they fused like bone. It was quiet, not peaceful but expectant. Juno was ahead of him, nose to the ground, tail steady, moving with a sense of purpose. She paused at a pile of collapsed beams and let out a soft chuff, something between a huff and a growl, then circled it once and looked back at him. He followed, boots crunching over frost-covered pine needles. "What is it, girl?" She started to dig. Not wildly, not playfully. She pawed at the dirt with a precise rhythm, like she knew something was buried there. Raymond dropped to one knee and cleared the rest of the debris by hand. Under the loose earth, something metallic caught the light. A rusted tin box, half-eaten by time. He lifted it carefully, brushing away layers of dirt and pine resin. The lid creaked, open with protest. Inside, nestled in rotted cloth, was a knife. Not a hunting knife, not a tool, but something handmade. The blade had a curve to it, a whittler's edge worn smooth from years of use. The handle, wood rubbed dark with sweat, bore a single carving. Hail Senior, Raymond stared. The breath left his lungs. His father had vanished from this place 40 years ago, back when Raymond was a boy. Everyone had assumed he'd left Montana behind for good. But here it was, proof that the man had returned, alone, and left something behind. "Where the hell did you find this?" he whispered. Juno didn't answer, just sat beside him, her breath fogging in the cold air. Her eyes didn't leave his. It wasn't just a tool. It was a relic, a message from someone who'd faced his own breaking point in these same woods. Raymond closed his hand around the knife, felt the grip his father had worn into the handle, and something sharp and steady locked into place in his chest. He stood up taller. "All right," he said. "Let's build something." The old foundation ran about 16 feet long, 10 feet across, enough for a single-room shelter. The stone base was level and sturdy, protected from the worst of the wind by a line of evergreens to the west. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Raymond salvaged what he could from the fallen roof: 2 decent beams, a pile of warped but usable planks, and a length of corroded pipe he could maybe turn into a chimney sleeve. Juno circled as he worked, never far from sight. Once, she darted into the woods and came back, dragging half a canvas tarp covered in old pine sap. Another time, she found an oil can buried near the stream and dropped it at his feet like a trophy. Raymond started calling her Quartermaster, and she wore the title with tail held high dignity. By afternoon, the frame of the cabin was rising. He'd crafted a lean-to brace with 2 vertical posts lashed together, using twine and stripped bark. Not pretty, but solid. The first few hammer swings were awkward. He hadn't done this kind of labor since the divorce. But the rhythm came back quickly. Each nail driven into wood echoed through the clearing like a heartbeat returning. Raymond's hands began to bleed by evening. Not deep, just the kind of raw scraping that came from honest work. He didn't stop. That night, he and Juno sat beside the fire inside the half-framed shelter. Wind seeped through the gaps, but the stone walls kept most of the cold at bay. Juno curled at his feet, ears twitching toward every rustle in the woods. Raymond turned the knife over in his hands again. His father had come here and stayed long enough to bury this. Had he planned to return to the world and failed? Or had the mountains been the only place that made sense to him? Raymond understood now. "You saved that box for me," he said, glancing at Juno. "Or maybe just reminded me to look." She thumped her tail once, slow and sure. Somewhere out, beyond the clearing, an owl hooted. Wind creaked the high pines. But inside the half-built walls, the fire burned steady. By morning, Raymond had made a decision. He wasn't going back. Not to the town, not to the noise, not to the version of himself who had watched his life collapse from the inside and done nothing to stop it. This wasn't exile. This was reclamation. With Juno at his side and his father's blade in his belt, Raymond would carve a new life out of what others had abandoned. And this time, no one was going to take it from him. The storm came without warning. That morning, the air had been eerily still. Raymond was chopping wood near the cabin, his breath fogging with every exhale, when Juno began to pace. Her movements were sharp, restless, eyes darting between the sky and the tree line. "Easy, girl," he said, setting another log on the block. But she didn't relax. She barked once, loud and cutting, then again, sharper, directed at the open mountain sky. He followed her gaze. Clouds, low and grey, were folding over the ridge like a slow avalanche. Within minutes, the wind shifted, a deep groan rolling through the trees. The smell of snow hit him. Metallic, raw, electric. Raymond looked around the half-finished cabin. The roof was patched, but barely. The frame solid, though the joints still gaped where the boards didn't meet flush. He had planned to reinforce it the next day. Too late now. He loaded wood inside, sealed what gaps he could with canvas and bark strips, and checked the fire. Juno wouldn't stop pacing, her nails scraping against the floorboards. "It's just a little snow," he muttered. "We've seen worse." By nightfall, the storm hit like a freight train. The wind screamed through the valley, battering the cabin with waves of white. The fire guttered, throwing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Raymond wrapped his coat tighter, trying to keep the smoke vent open. Snow forced its way in through every crack, drifting across the floor like crawling ghosts. Juno barked again, fierce this time, insistent. She ran to the far corner, pawed the wall, then raced back to him. Her entire body quivered, a living alarm. "Not now," he said, exhausted. His head pounded from cold and fatigue. He'd been fighting to keep the fire alive for hours. "It's fine, Juno, go lay down." She barked again, harder. That's when the roof cracked. A beam split down the center with a sound like a gunshot. The ceiling buckled. Raymond barely had time to look up before snow and timber came crashing down. The impact knocked him to the floor. Cold smothered everything. His ears rang. He tried to move, but pain flashed up his side. The world went white, then black. He woke to something warm against his face. Rough, wet, Juno. Her tongue pressed against his cheek, frantic. Her weight was against his chest, heavy but alive. When he tried to sit up, she nudged him back down, whining. The roof above them had collapsed, halfway, forming a crude pocket under the rafters. Snow was piled thick on all sides, trapping them inside a frozen cave. The air was bitter and thin. "Juno!" he rasped. His throat burned with cold. "You stayed?" She barked once, low and steady, then began tugging at the blanket beside him, pulling it over his legs. The motion was deliberate, purposeful. She nosed his arm under it next. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "Good girl." The wind howled outside, shaking what remained of the walls. Raymond reached for the small lantern nearby, its glass cracked but still intact. When he struck the flint, a weak flame flickered to life. It cast a trembling glow across the cramped space, enough to see Juno's eyes reflecting back at him. They stayed like that for hours. He drifted in and out of consciousness, half aware of her moving now and then, pressing her body close to his, blocking the drafts that seeped through the broken walls. Each time he woke, she was there, her breathing steady, her fur damp from melting snow. On the second night, the candle burned low. The air grew heavier. He could feel frost creeping into his beard. He thought of Sarah for the first time since she left. Their kitchen light, her laugh, the sound of her shoes on the porch. But the memory felt distant, like someone else's life. Now there was only Juno, only the small circle of warmth she fought to keep alive. At some point, he realized she hadn't barked in hours. She just stared at him, eyes bright, waiting. "What is it?" he whispered. She leaned forward and pressed her head against his chest. And then he understood. She hadn't barked because of fear. She had barked because she'd known the roof would fall, known he wouldn't listen. Tears burned his eyes. "You were trying to tell me." Her tail thumped once. He reached out, running his hand through her fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath. "You didn't bark for yourself," he said softly. "You barked for me." Outside, the wind began to ease. The long, hollow roar faded to a whisper. When morning came, pale light filtered through the cracks in the broken roof. Raymond pushed himself upright, every muscle stiff and sore. He cleared a path through the snow drifted inside, using the knife his father had left behind. When he opened the door, sunlight spilled in, pure, sharp, endless. The storm had passed. Juno stepped out first, paws sinking into the white crust. She turned once, looking back at him, tail low but wagging. Raymond followed her into the light. The cabin was half gone, but still standing. The fire pit buried, the roof torn open to the sky. Yet there was something unbroken in it too, something rebuilt by sheer will. He crouched beside Juno, resting a hand on her shoulder. "We'll fix it," he said quietly. "We'll start again." The candle inside flickered one last time before the wind snuffed it out. But warmth lingered, alive in the dog's breath, in the man's resolve, and in the silence that followed. The last of the snow surrendered to the thaw by late April, trickling off the roof in soft plinks and soaking the mossy earth beneath their boots. Raymond sat on the worn log bench he and Juno had dragged near the creek, sharpening the old Hale Senior knife with steady strokes, his breath finally no longer visible in the air. Juno lay nearby, nose twitching towards the breeze. Her ears stiffened. She stood up suddenly, growled low, not aggressive but alert, and stared across the stream. Raymond paused mid-stroke. "What is it, girl?" Instead of answering with a bark, Juno stepped forward, gaze fixed, body tense. She sniffed the wind, then let out a single bark, sharp and clear. Raymond rose slowly, fingers wrapping instinctively around the knife. Then he saw it, just past the split boulder near the edge of the woods, a flash of movement. Something or someone ducked down. "Show yourself!" Raymond's voice cracked from disuse. No reply. Juno didn't lunge. She didn't growl again. She advanced calmly, tail low but not tucked, and paused in front of the boulder. Her head tilted, and she let out a softer whine. Raymond approached with caution. Behind the boulder, crouched and shivering, was a boy. 17, maybe younger. Thin as fence wire, lips chapped, a faint cut bleeding on his temple. "Jesus," Raymond muttered. The kid didn't speak, didn't move. Raymond looked at Juno, who now sat beside the boy, her tail giving a single thump against the ground. "You trust him?" Raymond asked, knowing how stupid the question was. Juno didn't break eye contact with the boy. Her posture said more than any answer ever could. Raymond exhaled and dropped to one knee. "I've got dry socks and some food. You look like hell." The boy's eyes shimmered, but he still didn't move. "Name?" Raymond asked. "Eli." "That your real name?" A shrug, then, "It's the one I kept." Raymond didn't press. He'd once changed his name too, if only in spirit. Back at the cabin, Eli stayed silent as Raymond ladled thin venison stew into a tin cup. Juno settled beside him, pressing her body gently against the boy's leg. Eli stiffened, then slowly let his hand rest on her back. "She doesn't do that for strangers." Raymond muttered, more to himself than to the boy. Eli finally spoke. "Guess I'm not one." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "You running from something?" A long pause. "From someone. My stepdad." The words came slow and flat, like they'd been frozen for too long. "He hit you?" Eli nodded. Raymond's jaw tightened. He stirred the fire, the flames dancing in his tired eyes. "You stay tonight. We'll figure it out tomorrow," he said. Juno didn't sleep by Raymond's feet that night. She curled beside Eli instead, nose resting on his tattered hoodie, breath rising and falling in quiet sync with the boy's. Sometime before dawn, Raymond awoke to the sound of whispered words. He turned and saw Eli, sitting up, talking to Juno in hushed tones. "She knew," Eli whispered. "She knew I wasn't dangerous." Raymond leaned back, closed his eyes again. He'd lived long enough to stop trusting most people. But maybe, just maybe, you should trust a dog who doesn't bark for food, but for something deeper. And right now, Juno wasn't barking at all. She was watching, guarding, and for the first time since the war, Raymond slept without the axe beside his bed. The cold retreated day by day, peeling off the mountains like old paint. Grass poked through the melted snow. Birds began nesting again in the rafters of the broken cabin, and the creaking bones of the forest finally quieted, just enough to let life begin again. Raymond stood beside Eli, both of them studying the sagging cabin frame. He ran his hand along the weathered timber, his fingers knowing exactly which pieces would hold and which would crumble. "First rule of carpentry," Raymond said, voice low. "Everything leans until you learn how to brace it." Eli looked up, blinking at the sudden poetry. "You talking about the cabin or yourself?" Raymond chuckled. First time in months. Maybe both. They got to work before the sun hit full height, dragging half-rotted planks from the woodshed, stacking rocks for a makeshift foundation, hammering nails salvaged from rusted crates. Eli, though wiry and still skittish, picked things up fast. Muscle memory from helping his real dad build a shed before the man disappeared. Raymond showed him how to square off joints, use tension against tension to hold a frame in place, and seal cracks with dried moss and pine resin. In return, Eli showed Raymond a tangled web of wires, a scavenged solar cell, and the bones of an old portable battery unit pulled from behind a junked-out ATV. "You keep that stuff in your pack?" Raymond asked, stunned. "I had to charge my music, and sometimes I'd need light to read maps." Eli shrugged. "I like knowing how things work." Raymond nodded. "You and me both." Juno padded around them like a forewoman. She'd circle the cabin 3 times each morning before settling nearby, never quite resting. If they took a break too long, she'd nudge a glove, nudge a hammer, nudge a boy. Time to move. Midweek, a storm crept in. The roof wasn't finished. They had 1 tarp, 2 blankets, and a dog that refused to sleep under cover. Thunder cracked just past the ridge. Eli flinched at each boom. Juno pressed against him, heartbeat solid and steady. Raymond watched it from across the room. 1 trembling boy, 1 calm dog, and for the first time, no bark. She didn't need to make a sound. She was the sound between silence and panic. By morning, the storm had passed. But a new feeling settled in its place. They weren't just fixing a shelter anymore. They were building something they didn't know they'd missed. Later that day, Raymond walked out back to check the creek line. He came back to find Eli hanging a piece of reclaimed tarp across the back window, trying to keep out wind. Eli said. Raymond nodded. "Thought maybe this place could be ours," Eli added, softer. Raymond didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the old Hale Sr. knife and carved something into the wood beam above the door. Eli leaned closer. "What's it say?" Raymond stepped aside. It was only 1 word. "Home." That evening, they ate burnt rabbit stew and sat on mismatched crates. Eli played with the solar light, getting it to flicker. Juno rested between them, eyes half closed, tail brushing against each of their boots with each sleepy sigh. "You think dogs know stuff about people?" Eli asked. Raymond sipped from a dented mug. "Only the stuff that matters." "She knew I was safe." Eli murmured. "She came to me first." Raymond looked down at Juno, at the deep brown eyes that missed nothing. "No. She knew you needed us. And maybe we needed you too." The light dimmed. Juno shifted slightly, letting out a long, peaceful huff. Outside, the forest breathed differently now. Not quieter, not louder, just warmer. Raymond didn't say it aloud, but he felt it deep in his bones. This wasn't a stop along the road. This was the road beginning again. The scent of pine and wood smoke hung low that morning, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Raymond had just finished repairing the cabin's east wall, Eli handing him nails like a seasoned apprentice, when Juno froze. Not barked, not growled, just froze, every muscle alert. Raymond instinctively followed her line of sight down the narrow trail that led from the forest's edge. A slow-moving SUV was crawling up the path. White, government plates. Raymond's gut clenched. He dropped the hammer into the dirt and stepped forward, placing himself between Eli and whatever was coming. The vehicle stopped 15 yards away. The door opened. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s, tall, composed, shoulders squared like she'd spent a lifetime walking against wind. Sheriff's badge on her jacket, sidearm holstered but clearly worn from use. Hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her eyes scanned the scene, half-finished roof, solar rig, a teenager behind an older man, and a German shepherd who hadn't moved an inch. "Morning," she said calmly. Her voice didn't match the badge. It was more tired than threatening. Raymond didn't speak. Eli didn't breathe. Juno finally growled, low, deliberate. The woman froze in place. Raymond stepped forward, palms slightly raised. "She's trained, won't strike unless..." But then something changed. Juno's growl stopped. She tilted her head, took 2 cautious steps forward, eyes never leaving the sheriff's. Then she sniffed the air, walked up, and gently nudged the woman's hand with her nose. Raymond blinked. So did the sheriff. "That's new?" the woman muttered. Raymond narrowed his eyes. "You got something on you?" The sheriff looked down at Juno, who was now sitting beside her boots, tail still, eyes locked on the woman's face. "She sniffed out my old partner," the sheriff said quietly. 15 years ago, different county. We were tracking a missing child. That dog looked just like her. Different eyes, same soul." Juno whined once, soft, deep, then padded back to Raymond's side, her body calm now, as if verdict rendered. The sheriff took a slow breath and finally addressed him. "Raymond Hale, right? Ex-staff sergeant, discharged under honorable, spent the last 5 years off the grid. You've been looking?" "No, but someone's been talking." She pulled a folded paper from her jacket, handed it to him. Raymond read it. A complaint. Trespassing on government land. It said, "Possible endangerment of minor." Raymond folded it again, jaw tight. "You going to arrest me?" She shrugged. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether you're really just squatting," she said, glancing around at the makeshift power setup, the new beams, the solar cells tied to mason jars. "Or if you're building something that might matter." Eli stepped beside Raymond, nervous but standing his ground. "We didn't steal anything. We're not hurting anybody." "I can see that," she said, voice softening. She looked around again, this time slower. Let the silence do the talking. Let the wind carry its own stories through the cabin walls. Then she crouched, picked up the hammer from the dirt, and handed it to Raymond. "Sometimes rules aren't broken," she said, meeting his eyes. "They're just rewritten by people trying to survive." Raymond took the hammer. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Sheriff Donovan turned to leave, but paused. "One thing," she added. "The boy's name wouldn't happen to be Elijah Santiago, would it?" Raymond stiffened. So did Eli. "How do you know that?" Raymond asked. "Because 2 counties over, there's a missing persons report. Been open for 7 months. Mother's dead. Foster system kicked him out by mistake. No one's claimed him. No one wanted to." Raymond glanced at Eli. The boy's face was pale, but his hands didn't shake this time. "I'm not giving him back to that," Raymond said. "I didn't say you had to," she replied. She slid a card from her pocket and placed it on the porch rail. "You didn't hear this from me. But if someone comes sniffing around, you call me first, my personal line." Then, without another word, she walked back to the SUV. As the car rumbled down the trail, Eli turned to Raymond. "What just happened?" Raymond looked down at Juno, who was already curled beside the doorframe, tail flicking once like a period on a sentence. "We just bought time," he said. Juno raised her head. Her eyes flicked toward the woods again. Watching. Always watching. For now the law had come and gone. But the truth had stayed behind. It started with a knock. Not a loud one, more like someone asking permission to enter a story already in motion. Raymond opened the cabin door to find a tall man in his late 40s, grey at the temples, duffel bag in hand, wearing a jacket too thin for the cold. "Name's Martin. You don't know me, but I knew Sergeant Blake. We served in Iraq together," the man said, voice dry as gravel. He used to talk about a guy named Hale, said if I ever got truly lost, find the mountain. Raymond didn't respond right away, but Juno stepped forward, ears alert. She sniffed the air, circled Martin once, then did something rare. She leaned her head briefly against his leg. Martin's shoulders sagged like someone had finally said, "You're safe." Raymond stepped aside without another word. 3 days later, another knock. This time it was a woman. Pale, breath short, wrapped in a scarf that hid chemo scars. Rosa, early 40s, breast cancer survivor, technically. What she hadn't survived was the eviction after her final round of treatment. Her voice was a whisper, but her eyes weren't asking for pity. They were asking for a place to matter. Eli helped her carry in blankets. Martin patched the insulation in her corner. Raymond added another solar panel to the roof. By week's end, they'd cleared the second cabin nearby, wired it for heat, called it the Lantern. Juno had taken to sleeping halfway between both cabins, head always turned towards the woods, ears never fully resting. It was no longer just the boy she watched over. She was adjusting her perimeter. By month's end, word had spread. A hiker posted a blurry photo on Reddit of a veteran compound off-grid with solar and dog that knows things. That was the title. Someone else added a drone clip, uninvited, taken from above the tree line. Then the news stations came. First local, then national. Headlines read, "Ex-military creates hidden sanctuary in woods for the forgotten." They called it Mountain Haven. They aired shots of Juno standing firm at the edge of the porch, staring down each lens without flinching. One anchor joked, "I wouldn't try to get past her." But inside the cabin, things changed. Raymond saw it in the way Eli now hesitated before going outside, the way Martin double-checked locks that hadn't mattered before, the way Rosa kept the curtains drawn even in daylight. "We didn't ask for this," Raymond muttered one night. "They never ask the forest." Martin replied, voice low, "But it still gets burned when folks bring fire." Raymond looked over at Juno. She hadn't touched her food. Instead, every evening, she positioned herself at the same spot on the porch, facing the gravel road winding down the hill, as if waiting, or warning. She began barking, not wildly but rhythmically, every afternoon at dusk, like clockwork, not the sound of alarm. Something deeper, like recognition without visibility. Raymond followed her gaze each time. Nothing there, no movement, no headlights, just trees swaying like they held secrets they couldn't speak aloud. One night, Rosa sat beside Juno with her sketchpad. "She's listening to something we can't hear," Rosa said, drawing the arc of Juno's back, the rigid strength in her shoulders. "You think she senses something coming?" Eli asked. "She doesn't just sense it," Rosa replied. "She remembers it." Juno barked once, not at them, at the silence, then went still. Later that night, Raymond noticed tire tracks half a mile down the road. Not fresh, but not old either, like someone had parked there, listened, and left. He rubbed his jaw, unease crawling beneath the skin. By week's end, Rosa's sketches, of Juno, of the cabins, of moments around the fire, had gone viral. She'd posted one by accident, thinking only a few followers would see. It hit 3 million views in 72 hours. And the problem with viral was it never cared who it infected. Journalists started asking for interviews. One producer offered a Netflix deal. Raymond turned them all down. But something had been triggered. Juno knew it. She'd stopped sleeping through the night. Now she circled the cabins twice before dawn, pausing at the same oak tree near the road every time. One morning, Eli stepped outside early to find her sitting under it, staring downhill. He called to her. She didn't move. When Raymond arrived, he saw it too. Half buried in the mud, a piece of torn fabric. Grey, standard-issue military pant leg. Fresh tear. Raymond crouched, heart tightening. Juno placed her paw beside the fabric. Her eyes met his. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. She just watched. And in that silence, Raymond understood. This was no longer about survival. Something was on its way, and Juno already knew its scent. The envelope came folded, smudged with boot dust and rain. No ceremony, no warning. Just a single sheet with black ink and a seal from the county. Notice of eviction. Raymond stood on the porch, reading it in silence. The mountains were unusually quiet that morning. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. Juno was the first to react. She sniffed the paper, growled low in her throat, and in one swift motion, tore it from Raymond's hand. Her jaws crushed through the stamp, shredding it like it was a threat to the pack. When she was done, only damp, chewed fragments remained. Martin chuckled from the cabin door, but it was a bitter sound. "They're coming," he muttered. "Didn't think the trees would protect us forever." By mid-morning, the reporters arrived. A whole convoy of vans and SUVs, cameras, drones, microphones shoved into faces like weapons. They called Mountain Haven controversial. They asked if Juno had been trained to attack. They filmed her as if she were some ticking time bomb instead of the quiet guardian she was. Raymond stayed inside, but Eli, standing firm at the gate, told them, "We built this with our hands, with dignity. If you came for a show, you'll leave disappointed." But disappointment wasn't what the officials came for. 2 men in suits and a woman in a grey blazer walked up the gravel path later that afternoon. Government tags on their jackets. Bureau of Land Compliance. One of them, young and smug, asked where the primary resident was. Raymond stepped forward, eyes steady. The woman handed over a clipboard. "This land is classified as unmanaged forest and does not meet current code for permanent dwelling. You have 14 days to vacate." Juno growled again. Not a loud warning, more like a low, slow drumbeat of defiance. Raymond looked past them toward the tree line. For a moment he thought about packing up, disappearing again. He knew how to do that, knew how to survive in silence. But then Eli spoke. "You taught me how to build. Now let's fight for what we built." That stopped Raymond cold. He saw the boy, no, not a boy anymore, standing taller than he'd ever seen him, dirt on his hands, chin up like he belonged here, like they all did. Sheriff Clare showed up the next day. Not in uniform, but with files under her arm and determination in her stride. "I pulled your building permits. Every one of them's legal. Your solar grid certified. Composting toilets? Approved by the state pilot program from 2 years ago. You want to fight?" She said to the county agents, "You've got one." For the first time since the war, Raymond felt something strange swell in his chest. Not anger, not fear, hope. And the town responded. Letters poured in. Veterans who'd seen the segment on the news sent handwritten notes. Nurses who'd volunteered for Rosa's care fundraised to support the site. Local teachers brought students up on weekends to learn how to build solar arrays and collect rainwater. They painted a sign on reclaimed wood and nailed it to the gate. "This is not a camp. This is a home." Juno stood beside the sign as if it were her post. The hearings stretched for weeks. Arguments were made, photos shown. A young environmental scientist named Kayla flew in from Denver to testify that Mountain Haven was a working model of sustainable, self-sufficient living. Rosa, weak but steady, read her testimony from a wheelchair. "I survived cancer, but I live because of this place." The twist came from an unexpected source. The smug county official, turns out his own father was a veteran who died homeless on the streets of Portland. When the press dug it up, public pressure doubled. The official went silent, then resigned. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the final ruling came. The court declared Mountain Haven an official pilot site for sustainable rural living under a new environmental initiative. They were granted permission to stay, to expand, to teach. Cheers erupted. Eli cried openly. Martin saluted no one in particular. Rosa raised her arms to the sky like she could hug the clouds. Raymond didn't say anything. He just looked at Juno, who stood on the porch, watching the road with the same quiet strength she always had. Someone from the press tried to shove a microphone toward Raymond again. "Do you have a statement?" He pointed to the dog. She already gave it. The camera turned toward Juno just as the wind blew through her fur, her ears high, eyes locked on something none of them could see yet. Still guarding, still warning, still home. 6 months passed. The cabin, once a half-burned shell, now stood proud again. Not polished or perfect, Raymond wouldn't allow that. But it was whole. The porch had new boards hammered in with Eli's steady hands and Martin's gruff instruction. Rosa had painted the railing a soft mountain green. Every nail in that wood carried a story. Juno lay stretched across the top step, head resting between her paws, her fur now grayer around the muzzle. She moved slower, stood less, but her eyes never stopped watching the tree line. She still guarded like something out there might come crawling back. A rust-red leaf floated down from the birch above, landed gently on her back. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She just stared towards the forest, ears twitching at sounds only she could truly understand. The mountain had grown quieter since the court ruling. No more reporters, no more suits, no more people pointing cameras and asking if she was trained for defense. She was trained for something much harder: trust. A boy with dark curls and a spiral notebook stood a few feet away from the porch. His name was Micah, 13. He was writing an essay for his civics class titled, "What Makes a Hero?" Raymond had agreed to answer his questions, on one condition. He had to leave his phone in his backpack. No recordings, just notes, just honesty. Micah looked up, squinting at the sunlight through the trees. "So, when they told you to leave, when it all looked over, why did you stay?" Raymond didn't answer right away. He glanced at Eli, who was helping Rosa plant autumn vegetables in raised beds near the side yard. At Martin, who was sketching something in the dirt for a new wind turbine. At the chickens scratching happily in their reclaimed coop. Then he looked down at Juno. Her ears shifted. She hadn't moved all morning. But now, sensing his gaze, she slowly turned her head to him. That was all. Raymond's voice was quiet when it finally came. "She didn't bark for food," he said. "She barked for what others couldn't see." Micah paused, pencil hovering above the paper. "Like what?" Raymond smiled. "Like the people who would one day live because we refused to leave." Later that evening, as the sky bruised with dusk and the last bits of daylight melted into the pines, the wind shifted. A storm was rolling in, from the northwest, dragging with it a wet, wood-smoke chill. Raymond moved to gather firewood. Juno didn't follow. She stayed at her post, watching. A low bark rumbled from her chest, not loud, not a warning, just a reminder. She was still here, still on duty. Rosa brought out a blanket and gently draped it over Juno's back. The old shepherd gave a content sigh, eyes never leaving the woods. Raymond knelt beside her. "You know you can rest, right?" Juno blinked, then let out another soft breath, but she didn't move. That night, lightning flickered across the ridge. The family, because that's what they were now, ate stew together in the rebuilt cabin. Warm laughter echoed through the walls. There was no fear anymore, only presence. And still, she watched. At sunrise, they found her just as she had been. Head up, eyes open, ears tilted toward the forest. Silent, still guarding. Raymond didn't speak at first. He just sat beside her, laid a hand gently on her shoulder. The forest gave a soft wind in return, almost like a nod. 2 weeks later, a small plaque was carved and nailed to the porch rail, just beneath her favorite step. She didn't bark for food. She barked for what others couldn't see. Now, every few weeks, hikers and veterans, students and strangers passed through the mountain and sat beside that step. Some left flowers, some left dog tags, some said nothing at all, but they understood. Because somewhere in their own lives, someone, or some dog, had seen for them what they couldn't see for themselves. And in every bark, every stare, every stand taken, Juno had become more than a dog. She had become the truth, the kind that never needed to shout. Just wait, watch, guard, until you saw it for yourself. So now we ask you, what's your story with a loyal pet? If this story touched something in you, something you thought was lost or forgotten, share it in the comments. And if you believe loyalty still matters, if you believe in second chances and silent heroes with 4 legs, support the channel. Subscribe, share, tell someone. For Juno, and for all the ones still guarding the quiet places.